As the summer of 1914 dawned, Europe was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Britain stood proudly at the center of a vast empire, the wealthiest, most powerful, and most far-reaching in the world. Its ships ruled the oceans, its industry fed the globe, and its colonies stretched across 5 continents. But beneath the surface, rivalries were brewing. When a gunshot echoed in Sarajevo, the fragile peace shattered. Britain hesitated, torn between continental commitments and isolationist instincts. Yet when German troops marched into Belgium, Britain's decision was made. The Great War had begun. Millions of young men volunteered, teachers, farmers, clerks, believing it would be over by Christmas. Instead, they found themselves in the muddy trenches of the Western Front, staring across a no-man's land of barbed wire and death. The machine gun, the gas mask, and the endless artillery changed war forever. Britain's entry transformed the conflict into a global struggle, with troops from India, Australia, Africa, and Canada fighting under the Union Jack. What began as a European war became an imperial one. As 1914 closed, the world had changed. The age of glory had ended, and the age of mechanized slaughter had begun. In July 1916, the British Army launched the Somme Offensive, an operation meant to break the stalemate. What followed was one of the bloodiest days in British history. At dawn, the whistles blew. Thousands climbed from the trenches and marched toward the German lines, unaware that the enemy's defenses had survived the bombardment. By nightfall, 60,000 British soldiers were dead, wounded, or missing. The Somme became a symbol, not of victory, but of endurance. The courage of ordinary men trapped in extraordinary horror. The war poets, Owen, Sassoon, Graves, captured this despair in haunting verse. Behind the lines, women filled factories, making shells and tending the wounded. The empire had mobilized its entire soul. The Somme didn't win the war, but it reshaped Britain. The old world of aristocrats and empire began to die, replaced by a nation forged in sacrifice. By 1917, Britain was exhausted. Millions were dead, food was scarce, and the empire's faith in victory was fading. U-boats prowled the seas, sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. At home, the government introduced rationing. On the front, mud and despair swallowed everything. But change was coming. The United States entered the war, bringing fresh hope. The Royal Navy adapted, forming convoys and using new technologies like sonar. In the skies above France, British pilots dueled in fragile biplanes, knights of a dying world fighting in a mechanical age. Then, in 1918, Germany launched its final offensive. For weeks, the outcome hung in the balance, until Britain and its allies struck back. The 100 Days Offensive shattered the German lines. The armistice came on November 11, 1918. The guns fell silent. Britain had survived, but at unimaginable cost. Nearly 1 million of its soldiers were dead. Towns had lost entire generations. The empire had fought the war to save civilization, but in doing so, had torn its own heart apart. The Great War ended not with triumph, but with mourning. And beneath the victory parades, a darker truth was taking root, one that would shape the next war to come. The war to end all wars had left the world broken. Britain emerged victorious, but scarred, weary, and in debt. The empire reached its territorial peak, yet its soul was fractured. The 1920s brought disillusionment. Soldiers returned to unemployment and grief. The aristocracy waned as a new working class demanded rights. Women who had powered the war effort now fought for votes and equality. The British Empire still ruled millions, but the idea of empire itself was beginning to crumble. In Europe, Germany seethed under the Treaty of Versailles. Economic depression spread like disease. Fascism rose from the ashes, in Italy, then in Germany. The League of Nations promised peace, but Britain's leaders turned inward, haunted by memories of the trenches. By the 1930s, clouds gathered again. Hitler's rise was seen by some as a distant threat, by others as the inevitable result of Versailles. Britain's government hesitated, clinging to appeasement. Few could imagine that within a decade, the world would burn again. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain declared war. The nightmare had returned. The empire once again mobilized. Millions of soldiers from India, Canada, Africa, and Australia answered the call. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain stepped down, and a defiant voice rose in his place: Winston Churchill. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. In the first year of war, disaster struck. Norway fell, France collapsed. By 1940, Britain stood alone. The German war machine loomed across the Channel, and the world held its breath. The empire of the 19th century had become the fortress of the 20th, fighting not for dominance, but for survival. The summer of 1940 became Britain's greatest test. The Luftwaffe bombed cities night after night. London burned, but the people refused to break. In the skies, young pilots of the Royal Air Force fought against impossible odds. They came from across the empire: Canadians, Poles, Indians, Australians, united under one cause. Never in the field of human conflict, Churchill declared, was so much owed by so many to so few. The Blitz killed tens of thousands, but it also forged a nation's spirit. Underground, in shelters and tunnels, Britain endured. The empire's capital had become a battlefield, but also a symbol, proof that tyranny could be resisted. By 1941, Hitler turned east to invade the Soviet Union. Britain had survived the storm, but the war was far from over. The struggle for the future of humanity had only just begun. After years of struggle, the tide began to turn. In North Africa, British forces under Montgomery defeated Rommel's Afrika Korps at El Alamein, a victory Churchill called the end of the beginning. In the Atlantic, new technologies hunted U-boats. In the skies, the RAF struck back with deadly raids over Germany. The empire's far corners also burned. From Burma to Egypt, soldiers from across the Commonwealth fought shoulder to shoulder. Britain, once the center of empire, now led a global coalition for survival. By 1944, the Allies prepared for the greatest invasion in history, D-Day. British, American, and Canadian troops stormed Normandy's beaches, fighting not for conquest, but liberation. The world was turning once more toward freedom, but through fire. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. The war was over. Crowds filled London as Churchill waved from the balcony. The empire had survived its darkest hour, but victory came with a price. Cities lay in ruins, millions were dead, and Britain was bankrupt. The empire that had ruled the world was now exhausted. In Asia, the war ended after atomic fire fell on Japan. The world had entered a new, uncertain age. Britain's struggle between 1914 and 1945 had remade it. From empire to democracy, from master of the seas to defender of freedom, the transformation was complete. The Union Jack no longer flew in triumph, but in remembrance. The two world wars had ended one era, and begun another. The age of empires was dying. The age of humanity had just begun.